Welcome. Today we bring you the chilling story of the Porter family, whose dream home turns into a nightmare. Shortly after moving in, their daughter Sophie starts seeing a shadowy figure that lurks in the dark, and strange, terrifying events soon take over their lives. As the family uncovers the sinister history of the house, they realize they are facing something far more dangerous than they could have imagined. What dark secret haunts their home? Will they be able to protect their daughter before it's too late? Watch to find out. Comment below with your thoughts and subscribe for more gripping stories you won't want to miss. The sky was a bright, cloudless blue as the Porter family pulled into their new driveway. David Porter, 40, let out a long breath as he cut the engine. The house before him was quaint and charming, with a well-kept lawn, a freshly painted white picket fence, and flower boxes beneath the windows. It was a stark contrast to the bustling city life they had left behind. "Well, here we are," David said, glancing over at his wife, Lisa, who sat in the passenger seat, her hands nervously gripping her phone. Lisa gave a small, hopeful smile. "It's beautiful. I think this will be good for us for Sophie." From the back seat, Sophie, their 8-year-old daughter, perked up. "Can I go see my room?" she asked, her excitement barely contained. David chuckled. "Let's get inside first, kiddo." The move to Evergreen Street in the small town of Brookfield had been a carefully considered decision. David had been offered a remote position as a software engineer, and Lisa was taking a break from teaching to focus on Sophie. After years of city living where every day felt like a race, they craved peace and a safer environment for their daughter to grow up in. "Ready for the next chapter?" David asked Lisa as they got out of the car. "Ready," Lisa replied, though a trace of uncertainty lingered in her voice. Together they walked toward the front door of their new home, eager to begin this new life, unaware of the shadows lurking just beneath the surface of this seemingly perfect neighborhood. Boxes were scattered throughout the living room when the doorbell rang. Lisa wiped her brow and opened the door to find a friendly, older man with a graying beard and a warm smile. "Hello there," he greeted. "I'm Mr. Grayson, your landlord. Thought I'd come by to see how you're settling in." "Nice to meet you, Mr. Grayson. I'm Lisa, and this is my husband, David." She waved David over, who was busy unpacking in the kitchen. "Well, welcome to Brookfield," Mr. Grayson said, shaking David's hand. "It's a quiet, peaceful neighborhood. Good place for families." "That's what we're hoping," David said, smiling. "We've been needing a slower pace of life." As they chatted, Mr. Grayson's expression shifted slightly. "I should mention the previous tenant, Mr. Shaw, passed away in the house a few months back. Nothing to be concerned about. He was elderly, natural causes." David and Lisa exchanged a glance, an unspoken agreement to brush off any discomfort. Mr. Grayson continued, "It's an old house. You'll hear some creaks and groans, but nothing unusual. Just part of its charm." Sophie, overhearing the conversation, tugged on Lisa's sleeve. "Did the old man leave any ghosts behind?" she asked, her voice a mix of fear and curiosity. Mr. Grayson chuckled, patting her on the head. "No ghosts here, little one. Just good memories." As the landlord left, the Porters returned to unpacking, but a faint sense of unease lingered in the air. David tried to push it aside, telling himself it was just the stress of moving. But Sophie remained unusually quiet for the rest of the day. By late afternoon, the sun began to dip lower in the sky, casting long shadows across the quiet street. As David carried a box to the garage, he noticed a figure standing in the neighboring yard. A man, middle-aged, with arms crossed over his chest, was staring at their house. David hesitated, unsure whether to wave or ignore the man. The tension in the stranger's posture made him uneasy. "Can I help you?" David called out, his voice friendly but cautious. The man slowly walked over, his lips curling into a sneer that barely resembled a smile. "Evening," he said, his tone thick with something that didn't quite fit the pleasantry of his words. Ed Wilkins. I live next door. David Porter, he replied, extending a hand, but Ed ignored it. His eyes roved over David, then Lisa, who had come to stand beside him, and finally settled on Sophie, who was playing in the yard. So you're the new folks, Ed said, his voice tinged with an unmistakable edge. Neighborhood's been changing lately. People like Mr. Shaw were the backbone here, respected, quiet. Now, well, seems like it's all going downhill. David felt the sting of the words, the unspoken insinuation loud and clear. He kept his voice steady. We're just looking for a peaceful place to raise our daughter. Ed's eyes narrowed slightly. Peaceful, right. Well, I hope it stays that way. You folks better keep it that way, too. David's jaw tightened, but before he could respond, Ed's gaze shifted to Sophie. He smiled, a small, thin smile that felt anything but friendly. Nice little girl you've got there. Hope she's not the troublesome type. Lisa stepped forward, putting a protective arm around Sophie's shoulders. We're here to be part of this community, Mr. Wilkins. We don't want any trouble. Ed's smirk grew wider. Just don't bring any, and we'll be fine. Without another word, he turned and walked back to his house, leaving an uncomfortable silence in his wake. David exhaled slowly. What was that about? Lisa shook her head, her eyes still on the retreating figure. I don't know, but I don't like him. Let's just keep to ourselves. David nodded, but as they walked inside, he couldn't shake the cold feeling Ed had left behind. The first night in the new house was uneventful. The Porters were exhausted from the move, collapsing into bed as soon as Sophie was tucked in. But by the second night, things began to feel different. It was around 3 a.m. when Sophie's scream shattered the silence. David and Lisa bolted upright, racing down the hallway to Sophie's room. They found her sitting up in bed, her small frame trembling as tears streaked down her cheeks. There was a man, Sophie sobbed. He was standing right there, watching me. David's heart raced as he scanned the room. The window was locked, the closet empty, and the shadows seemed harmless, but Sophie's terror was palpable. Sophie, it was just a nightmare, Lisa said gently, pulling her into a tight hug. No one's here, see? Sophie shook her head. No, Mommy. He was real. I saw him. David exchanged a glance with Lisa, worry creasing his brow. Maybe it's just the new environment, he whispered, though the words didn't comfort him. She's adjusting. Let's not make it worse by feeding into it. They comforted Sophie until she fell back asleep, but neither David nor Lisa could shake the feeling that something wasn't right. 2 nights later, the atmosphere in the house grew heavier. Lisa began to hear faint noises at night, footsteps, the soft creak of a door, whispers that seemed to come from nowhere. She dismissed them at first, chalking it up to the house settling or her overactive imagination. But Sophie's claims became more frequent. Every night she woke screaming, insisting the man was back, standing at the foot of her bed, watching her with cold, empty eyes. David checked every corner of the room, but there was no sign of an intruder. No open windows, no doors left ajar. Nothing. Sophie, David said softly, sitting on the edge of her bed. Sometimes when we're scared or in a new place, our minds play tricks on us. You know that, right? Sophie hesitated, her wide eyes still searching for the shadows. Maybe, she whispered, but he looked so real. Lisa watched from the doorway, her heart aching for her daughter. She wasn't sure what to believe anymore. Sophie's fear was genuine, but there was no evidence of anyone else in the house. Do you want to sleep in our room tonight? Lisa asked, hoping the closeness would calm her. Sophie nodded, and David carried her to their bedroom, tucking her between them. As they lay in the dark, David's mind raced. He had always been the rational one, the one who kept his feet on the ground. But now even he couldn't deny that something strange was happening. "I'm going to install cameras," David whispered to Lisa, his voice barely audible. "Just to be sure." Lisa nodded, grateful for the plan but still deeply unsettled. She clutched Sophie closer, silently hoping that whatever was happening in their new home would stop soon. But in the back of her mind, she knew this was only the beginning. The following morning, David woke with a pounding headache. He hadn't slept much, tossing and turning, replaying Sophie's terrified words in his mind. Lisa was already up, making breakfast for Sophie, who sat at the kitchen table, bleary-eyed and quiet. The tension in the house was palpable. Sophie hadn't mentioned the shadowy figure that morning, but David knew the fear was still there, simmering beneath the surface. "I think we should go talk to the neighbors," Lisa said as she flipped pancakes. "See if anyone else has experienced anything strange around here." David grimaced, recalling the unsettling interaction with Ed Wilkins. "I doubt the neighbors will be much help. Ed clearly doesn't like us, and the rest of them, well, they've been pretty distant." Lisa frowned, setting a plate of pancakes in front of Sophie, who barely touched them. "We can't just do nothing. What if this is real? What if someone really is getting into the house?" David rubbed his temples, torn between his desire to protect his family and the rational side of his brain that told him this was all just in their heads. "I'm installing the cameras today. We'll see if they pick up anything. But we have to be careful, Lisa. We don't want to stir up trouble with the neighbors if it's just Sophie's imagination." Lisa's mouth pressed into a thin line, but she didn't argue. They had faced enough hostility from Ed already. If they started accusing the neighborhood of being unsafe, it could make things worse. Later that day, David installed small, discreet security cameras in key areas of the house: Sophie's room, the living room, and the front door. As he worked, he kept glancing toward Ed's house. The curtains were drawn, but David could feel the eyes on him, watching. That night, as they settled in, the tension remained thick. Sophie refused to sleep in her room, and after another restless night of hearing strange noises in the house, Lisa couldn't blame her. Days passed, and Sophie's fear seemed to deepen. She refused to go into her room unless someone was with her, and even during the day she would stay close to Lisa, her small hands gripping tightly to her mother's arm. "She's not eating. She's barely sleeping," Lisa confided to David one night after Sophie had finally fallen asleep between them. "I don't know how much more of this she can take." David sat at the edge of the bed, his head in his hands. "I know. It's like she's not the same kid anymore. This fear, it's consuming her." Lisa sighed, her eyes filled with worry. "She says the man is coming more often. It's not just at night anymore. She says she's seen him during the day too." David's stomach tightened. He didn't want to admit it, but part of him was starting to believe Sophie. The cameras had picked up strange movements, shadows in her room, but nothing concrete. No man, no clear intruder. Still, Sophie's consistent descriptions of the man, tall, wearing old-fashioned clothes, with hollow eyes, unnerved him. How could she make something like that up night after night? "We should consider talking to someone," Lisa said quietly. "A therapist, maybe. Someone who can help Sophie process whatever this is." David hesitated. What if this isn't just in her head? What if someone really is coming into the house? Lisa looked at him, her expression torn between fear and skepticism. How, David? How would someone get in without tripping the alarm, without leaving any sign? "I don't know," David admitted, his voice filled with frustration. "But something is happening, and we need to figure it out." The next morning, While tidying up Sophie's room, Lisa found something that made her heart stop. A small, worn-out toy soldier. It was old, clearly from another era, and certainly not something that belonged to Sophie. Lisa stared at it, a chill running down her spine. She hadn't seen this toy before, and she was sure it hadn't been in Sophie's things when they moved. "Sophie," Lisa called out, her voice tight. "Where did you get this?" Sophie looked up from her coloring book in the living room, her face pale. "The man left it for me," she said softly. "He put it by my bed last night." Lisa's heart raced. "What do you mean, sweetie? Did you see him? Did he give it to you?" Sophie shook her head, her eyes wide with fear. "No, Mommy, I didn't see him. But when I woke up, it was just there." Lisa's hands trembled as she held the toy. This was real. Someone had to have placed this here. But how and why? When David came home that evening, Lisa showed him the toy. "This isn't ours," she said, her voice low and urgent. "Sophie says the man left it." David's face paled as he examined the toy. "This looks old, like it's from another time." "I don't care where it's from," Lisa snapped, her fear turning into frustration. "I want to know how it got here." David didn't have an answer. He stared at the toy soldier in his hand, a sinking feeling in his gut. Whatever was happening in their house was more than just a child's nightmare. Something or someone was leaving these signs behind. That night, David set up the camera feed on his phone, determined to catch whatever or whoever was causing this. He couldn't keep dismissing Sophie's claims, not when there was now physical evidence in their house. As the night dragged on, David couldn't sleep. Every noise in the house made him jump. The creak of the floorboards, the groan of the pipes, even the soft hum of the refrigerator felt ominous in the quiet darkness. At around 2 a.m., David finally began to drift off when his phone buzzed with a motion alert from the camera in Sophie's room. His heart leaped into his throat as he fumbled to his phone, pulling up the live feed. There on the screen he saw it, a shadow moving across Sophie's room, stopping at the foot of her bed. David's blood ran cold. He jumped out of bed, racing down the hallway to Sophie's room. He threw the door open, flipping on the light, but there was nothing. No one. Sophie was sound asleep, her small body curled up under the blankets. David's breath came in short, ragged bursts as he scanned the room. The window was locked, the closet empty. There was no sign of an intruder. But he had seen it. The camera had captured it. David knelt beside Sophie's bed, his hands shaking. He couldn't keep denying it. Something was happening in their house. Something beyond rational explanation. He checked the camera footage again, but the shadow was gone. It had been real, but it had disappeared as soon as he entered the room. For the first time, David felt truly afraid. David showed the footage to Lisa the next morning. She stared at the screen, her face pale, her hands gripping the edge of the table. What is that?" she whispered, her voice shaky. "I don't know," David said, running a hand through his hair. "But it's real, Lisa. Sophie wasn't imagining it." Lisa's eyes filled with tears. "What do we do? Do we call the police? What do we tell them? That there's a shadow man in our daughter's room?" David shook his head. "No, we can't call the police, not yet. We don't have enough proof and they'll think we're crazy." "So we just do nothing," Lisa snapped, her voice rising in frustration. "We just let this keep happening?" "I don't know what else to do," David shot back. "I installed the cameras and this is what we have. A shadow. How do we explain that?" Lisa stood up from the table, pacing the kitchen, her hands trembling. "This isn't just about Sophie anymore, David. This is about us. Our safety. Something is in our house and we can't just ignore it." David knew she was right, but the thought of going to the police, or anyone, felt like a step too far. How could they explain what was happening without sounding delusional? "We need more evidence," David finally said. "I'll set up more cameras. Watch the footage closely. If something else happens, then we'll go to the police." Lisa looked at him, her eyes filled with desperation. How much more are we going to let happen? The next few nights were a blur of anxiety and fear. David checked the camera feed obsessively, watching every shadow, every flicker of movement, but nothing concrete appeared again. The tension in the house grew with each passing day, and Sophie's fear only deepened. Then, on the 5th night after the toy soldier appeared, everything changed. It was just after midnight when David heard a noise coming from Sophie's room, a faint, low creak like someone stepping on the floorboards. His heart raced as he grabbed his phone, pulling up the live feed from Sophie's room. At first, he saw nothing. The room was quiet, Sophie fast asleep in her bed. Then, out of the corner of the screen, a figure appeared, dark, tall, and unmistakably human. The shadowy man stood at the foot of Sophie's bed, just as she had described. David's blood turned to ice. He didn't hesitate this time. He bolted out of bed, racing down the hallway, his heart pounding in his ears. He burst into Sophie's room, flipping on the light. The figure was gone. Sophie sat up in bed, her eyes wide with fear. "Daddy, he was here. He was right there." David scanned the room, his heart racing. There was no one there. The window was still locked, the door closed. It was impossible. But David had seen it. Sophie had seen it. And now, there was no denying the truth. The next morning, David and Lisa sat at the kitchen table, the weight of the previous night's events hanging over them like a dark cloud. "We can't stay here," Lisa said quietly, her voice barely above a whisper. "It's not safe. Whatever this is, it's not going away." David stared down at his hands, his mind racing. "I don't want to leave," he said, though even as he said the words, he wasn't sure why. "We just moved here. We can't run from this." Lisa's eyes filled with tears. "David, this isn't something we can fight. It's not something we can fix. We have to protect Sophie." Before David could respond, there was a knock at the front door. He stood up, his heart sinking as he opened the door to find Ed Wilkins standing on the porch, his arms crossed over his chest, a scowl on his face. "You need to leave," Ed said bluntly, his voice cold and hard. David blinked, taken aback. "What?" "You heard me," Ed growled. "I know what's been going on in that house. I warned you. You need to get out before things get worse." David's stomach twisted. "How do you know what's happening in my house?" Ed's eyes narrowed. "I've lived here long enough to know what that house is capable of. You think you're the first family to go through this? You're not, and you won't be the last if you don't get out." David's heart raced. "What are you talking about? What do you know?" Ed leaned in closer, his voice low and menacing. "I'm telling you this for your own good. Leave, before you lose everything." Without waiting for a response, Ed turned and walked away, leaving David standing on the porch, his mind reeling. David stood on the porch long after Ed had left, his mind reeling. Ed's warning echoed in his ears. "You're not the first family to go through this. Leave before you lose everything." When David finally returned inside, Lisa was waiting in the living room, her eyes red from crying. "What did he say?" she asked quietly. David sat down next to her, feeling the weight of everything they had been through pressing down on his chest. "He knows what's going on," he said, voice tight. "He told me. We're not the first family to experience this. Apparently this house has a history." Lisa's face paled. "What do you mean? What kind of history?" "I don't know," David replied, shaking his head, "but we need to find out." The next day, David and Lisa began researching the house's past. They went to the Brookfield Public Library, poring over old newspapers and property records. What they uncovered sent chills down their spines. Several families had lived in the house before them, but their stays were brief and filled with turmoil. The most disturbing story was that of Raymond Shaw, a man who lived there in the 1960s. His family had vanished under mysterious circumstances. His wife and children disappeared one night, and Shaw was found dead in the house weeks later. Officially, it was ruled, but locals whispered about something darker. There were rumors, Lisa said, reading aloud from a yellowed newspaper clipping. People said Shaw abused his family. He was controlling, violent, but no one knows what really happened. His family just disappeared. David felt a cold knot of fear tighten in his stomach. Do you think the thing Sophie is seeing could be him? Lisa's hands trembled as she set the newspaper down. I don't know, but whatever it is, it's dangerous. The realization hit David like a punch to the gut. They weren't just dealing with a haunting, they were dealing with something far more sinister, something that had taken lives before, and it was after their daughter. As they dug deeper into the house's past, David and Lisa discovered that Raymond Shaw wasn't the only one tied to the house's dark history. Over the decades, several other families had moved in and quickly left, citing strange occurrences and an overwhelming sense of dread. The most recent tenants had only stayed for 6 months before moving out, leaving behind everything they owned. What if it's not just Shaw? David said one night as they sat at the kitchen table, surrounded by old documents and newspaper clippings. What if whatever's in this house is something worse, something that's been here all along? Lisa shuddered. I don't want to think about that, but we can't ignore it anymore. Sophie is in danger. They agreed to confront Ed Wilkins again, desperate for answers. But when they knocked on his door the next morning, there was no answer. The curtains were drawn tight, and the house was eerily silent. Maybe he's gone, Lisa whispered, her voice trembling. David shook his head. He knows something. We just need to figure out what. The atmosphere in the Porter house grew more oppressive with each passing day. The shadowy figure appeared more frequently, lingering longer at the foot of Sophie's bed, sometimes moving closer. Sophie's once vibrant personality faded as she grew more withdrawn and fearful. Lisa, too, began to feel the weight of the house pressing down on her as though the very walls were watching them. David's sleep became fitful, plagued by nightmares of the shadowy figure, now more menacing than ever. He woke up drenched in sweat, his heart racing. No matter how many cameras he installed, he could never catch the figure clearly. It always seemed to disappear just as he reached Sophie's room. One night, while watching the live feed from the camera in Sophie's room, David saw something that chilled him to his core. The figure was standing at the foot of Sophie's bed again, but this time it leaned down, reaching toward her. David ran to the room, flinging the door open, but as always, there was nothing there. Sophie was awake, trembling, her eyes wide with terror. "Daddy," she whispered, her voice shaking. "He touched me." David's heart sank. He knelt by her bed, pulling her into his arms. "We're going to fix this, sweetie, I promise. We won't let him hurt you." But even as he said the words, David wasn't sure how much longer they could stay in the house. Desperation pushed David and Lisa to confront Ed again. This time, Ed answered the door, looking more haggard and frail than before. His eyes were bloodshot, his face gaunt. "We need to talk," David said, his voice firm. Ed hesitated for a moment before stepping aside, letting them in. The inside of his house was dimly lit, and the air smelled stale as though the windows hadn't been opened in years. "I warned you," Ed muttered as he sat down in a worn armchair. "I told you to leave." "What do you know about this house?" Lisa demanded, her voice shaking. "What's happening to our daughter?" Ed sighed, rubbing his temples. "That house, it's cursed. It has always been, ever since Shaw. Raymond Shaw? David asked, his stomach tightening. Ed nodded. I knew him. Lived here my whole life, watched everything that happened. Shaw was a monster, abused his family, controlled them, hurt them. But it wasn't just him. There's something in that house, something evil. It took his family, and it's been taking others ever since. David and Lisa exchanged a horrified glance. What do you mean, taking them? Lisa asked. Ed's voice dropped to a whisper. The house. It feeds on fear. It wants to consume anyone who lives there. The longer you stay, the worse it gets. Shaw's family, the ones before you, they couldn't escape it. I've been trying to warn everyone since. David felt his pulse quicken. Why didn't you say something sooner? Why all the hostility? Ed's eyes filled with regret. Because I tried before. I tried to warn the others, but they didn't listen. They thought I was crazy. I thought if I could scare you enough, you'd leave before it got to this point. Lisa's voice was trembling with anger and fear. Our daughter is being tormented, and you knew this was happening? Ed's face crumpled. I'm sorry, I thought I could stop it. David stood up, his body trembling with rage. What do we do now? How do we stop it? Ed looked up at him, eyes hollow. You can't stop it. All you can do is leave. David and Lisa drove home in silence, their minds racing with the gravity of Ed's revelation. But as they pulled into their driveway, Lisa turned to David, her expression resolute. We can't leave, David. We can't run from this. David stared at her, shocked. What do you mean? Ed said. I know what Ed said. Lisa interrupted. But if we leave, this thing will just move on to the next family, or it might follow us. We need to face it. Fight it. David was about to argue when the front door to their house slammed shut, though no one had been inside. Both of them froze, fear curling around their hearts. The house was watching them. They entered cautiously, and David checked the cameras on his phone, but nothing appeared out of the ordinary. Sophie was in the living room, drawing quietly, her back to the door. Sophie, Lisa called gently. Sophie turned, her face pale. Mommy, he's here. David's phone buzzed in his hand, a motion alert from the camera in Sophie's room. His stomach clenched as he opened the feed. The shadowy figure was there again, standing in the hallway just outside the living room, watching them. Lisa gasped. David, we need to get out of here. But before they could move, the lights flickered, and the temperature in the room dropped dramatically. Sophie whimpered, clutching her stuffed bunny to her chest. The figure moved closer, its form becoming more distinct, a tall, dark figure with hollow eyes and a twisted smile. David's mind raced. They couldn't fight this thing, but they couldn't run either. It was too late for that. We have to do something, Lisa whispered, her eyes wide with terror. David nodded, grabbing Sophie and pulling her close. We're getting out of here, now. But as they moved toward the front door, the figure blocked their path, its cold, oppressive presence pressing down on them like a weight. Sophie cried out, her small body shaking with fear. Daddy, it's here, he's going to take me. David's heart pounded in his chest. He had never felt so powerless. But then, deep within him, a surge of anger rose. He wouldn't let this thing take his daughter. With a strength he didn't know he had, David pushed past the figure, yanking open the front door. The cold presence clawed at him, but he fought through it, pulling Lisa and Sophie outside. As soon as they crossed the threshold, the oppressive weight lifted, but the shadow lingered at the doorway, watching them with its hollow, hungry eyes. David slammed the door shut, his breath ragged, his body trembling. We can't go back in there, he gasped. Lisa clutched Sophie to her chest, her face pale. What do we do now? The family stayed with friends that night, too terrified to return to the house. David barely slept, his mind racing with everything that had happened. How had things gotten this far? How had they missed the warning signs? In the morning, David and Lisa sat at a coffee shop, sipping their drinks in silence. The sunlight streaming through the windows felt almost mocking, a stark contrast to the darkness that had consumed their lives. "We need help," Lisa finally said, her voice quiet but firm. "We can't fight this on our own." David nodded, his heart heavy. "But who do we even go to? Who could help us with something like this?" Lisa looked at him in the eye, her expression resolute. "A paranormal investigator." David blinked, taken aback. "You're serious?" Lisa's jaw tightened. "We don't have any other options. This isn't just a bad dream or something we can explain away. This is real, David, and we need to fight it." David exhaled slowly, running his hand through his hair. "Okay, let's find someone." David spent the next few hours frantically searching online, looking for anyone with expertise in the paranormal. Lisa stayed by his side, occasionally checking on Sophie, who was in the next room watching cartoons, seemingly unfazed by the previous night's terror. But they both knew that Sophie's calm was fragile, and the slightest thing could bring her fear rushing back. "Here," David said, his finger hovering over a website. Jillian Marks. She's a paranormal investigator who specializes in malevolent hauntings. She's written a few books, even been on TV a couple of times. Lisa leaned in to read the page. "Do you think she'll help us?" "I don't know," David said, "but I'm going to call her. We need all the help we can get." David made the call, explaining their situation in a tight, anxious voice. To his relief, Jillian didn't dismiss him as crazy. Instead, she listened carefully, asked a few probing questions, and then said she would come out the next day to assess their situation. "Do you think she can actually do something?" Lisa asked after David hung up. David looked at her, his expression grim. "I hope so, because I don't know how much more of this we can take." The following day, Jillian Marks arrived at the Porter house. She was a tall woman in her early 40s with sharp features and an air of quiet authority. Her long black hair was tied to a braid, and she carried a small black bag of equipment. "David, Lisa," she greeted them with a firm handshake. "Let's get right to it. Tell me everything you've experienced." Over coffee, David and Lisa recounted every unsettling detail. The shadowy figure in Sophie's room, the strange noises, the toy soldier, and Ed Wilkins' ominous warnings. Jillian took careful notes, nodding occasionally but remaining composed. "This is serious," Jillian said when they finished. "Malevolent hauntings like this are rare, but they do happen. From what you've told me, this spirit is feeding off of your daughter's fear. It's growing stronger because of it. Can you stop it?" Lisa asked, her voice laced with desperation. "I can help," Jillian replied, "but I need to be honest with you, it won't be easy. Spirits like this don't go quietly. They're attached to the place and to the people in it, but we can weaken it. We can make it leave." Jillian spent the rest of the day setting up equipment around the house, electromagnetic field meters, motion sensors, and cameras far more advanced than the ones David had installed. She also brought out items David and Lisa didn't expect: herbs, candles, and what appeared to be a small bell. "What's all that for?" David asked, watching her set up a circle of candles in the living room. "It's for the cleansing ritual," Jillian explained. "These items will help ward off the spirit and weaken its hold on the house." The Porters felt a small sense of hope return as Jillian worked. For the first time in weeks, the oppressive feeling in the house seemed to lift, if only slightly. Sophie even seemed calmer, playing quietly in the backyard, under Lisa's watchful eye. But David knew better than to believe the nightmare was over. The shadow had shown itself to be persistent, and he doubted it would let go so easily. That evening, As Jillian prepared for the ritual, there was an unexpected knock at the door. David opened it to find Ed Wilkins standing on the porch, looking even more gaunt and worn than before. His face was pale, and his eyes were bloodshot, as if he hadn't slept in days. "I heard you called someone in," Ed said, his voice rasping. "Good. You're going to need all the help you can get." "Why are you here, Ed?" David asked, his tone tense. After all the hostility Ed had shown, David didn't trust him. "I came to help," Ed said, stepping forward, his shoulders slumped. "I can't undo what I did, but I've been fighting this thing for years. I know how to weaken it." David hesitated, then opened the door wider. He didn't want to trust Ed, but if he had valuable knowledge about the spirit, they needed him. Ed entered the house, and his eyes immediately landed on Jillian. "You're the expert, huh?" he said, his voice laced with bitterness. Jillian raised an eyebrow but didn't respond. She continued lighting candles and preparing the room for the ritual. "What do you know about this spirit?" David asked Ed. "How can we stop it?" Ed sighed and sat down heavily on the couch. "You can't stop it completely. It's been here longer than any of us. It feeds on fear, and it grows stronger the more it gets. But there's one way to weaken it. You have to make a sacrifice." "A sacrifice?" Lisa asked, her face pale. "What do you mean?" Ed looked at her, his expression grim. "Someone has to confront it directly. Someone has to be willing to give themselves up on it. That's the only way to draw it out fully. Only then can it be banished." David and Lisa exchanged a horrified glance. "We can't do that," David said firmly. "We're not going to sacrifice anyone." Ed shook his head. "It doesn't have to be one of you. I'll do it. I've been living in the shadow of this thing for years. It's my fault for not stopping it sooner. If I can give you a chance to save your daughter, I'll do it." David was taken aback by Ed's offer. He had spent weeks despising the man for his hostility, but now, seeing the weariness in his eyes, David understood. Ed had been fighting this battle alone for far too long. "Are you sure?" David asked quietly. Ed nodded, his jaw set. "It's the only way." That night, with Ed's help, Jillian prepared for the final confrontation with the spirit. The air in the house felt thick and charged, as if something dark and malevolent was watching, waiting. David, Lisa, and Sophie stayed together in the living room as Jillian and Ed worked. Jillian explained the plan in hushed tones. Ed would act as bait, drawing the spirit into the open, and Jillian would perform the ritual to banish it once and for all. "It's going to get worse before it gets better," Jillian warned. "The spirit will fight back. It knows we're trying to force it out." David nodded, his heart pounding. He held Sophie close, trying to reassure her, but his own fear was overwhelming. If this didn't work, he didn't know what they would do. As the night deepened, the temperature in the house began to drop. The lights flickered, and strange creaking noises echoed through the walls. Sophie whimpered in Lisa's arms, and Lisa shot David a look of pure terror. "It's starting," Jillian said quietly. "Stay calm. No matter what happens, don't let the spirit feed off your fear. It's what gives it strength." Suddenly, a loud crash came from upstairs. The entire house seemed to shake, and the lights flickered wildly. David jumped to his feet, his heart racing. "Stay here," Jillian commanded. "We're ready." Ed stood in the middle of the living room, his face pale but determined. He held a small, old photograph in his hand, of his daughter, David realized. It was his last tie to the life he'd lost. Ed took a deep breath and closed his eyes. "Come on," Ed muttered under his breath. "I'm ready for you. Show yourself." The air in the room grew colder, and the shadow began to take form in the corner, growing larger, more defined. It was no longer just a vague figure. Now, it had the outline of a man. Its hollow eyes locked onto Ed, who stood firm. "Come on!" Ed shouted, his voice trembling but resolute. "Take me!" David's breath caught in his throat as the shadow lunged toward Ed. He watched in horror as Ed's body convulsed, his face twisted in agony. The spirit seemed to engulf him, its dark form wrapping around him like smoke. "Now!" Jillian yelled. She began chanting, her voice rising in a powerful incantation. The candles flickered, and the air hummed with energy. The shadow recoiled, its form wavering as if it were being pulled apart. Ed collapsed to the ground, his body limp. But the shadow remained, writhing and struggling against Jillian's words. The shadow let out an ear-piercing shriek, its form twisting and contorting as Jillian's ritual gained strength. The entire house seemed to tremble, as though the spirit was trying to tear it apart from the inside. David clutched Sophie tightly, shielding her from the cold wind that seemed to swirl around the room, even though the windows were shut. Lisa stood beside them, her face pale and eyes wide with terror, but her hands were steady as she reached out to hold David's arm. Jillian's chanting grew louder, more forceful, and the candles around the room flared brightly, casting the shadow in sharp relief. The spirit seemed to shrink, its edges flickering like smoke in a strong wind. But it wasn't done yet. With a final desperate surge, the shadow lunged toward David and Sophie. For a brief, terrifying moment, David felt the icy grip of its presence, cold fingers brushing against his skin. "Stay strong," Jillian shouted. "Don't let it get to you." David gritted his teeth, holding Sophie tighter. "I won't let you have her," he yelled, his voice hoarse with fear and rage. The spirit reared back, writhing as if in pain, and then with a final shudder it disintegrated into thin air. The candles flickered out and the room fell into an eerie silence. Jillian collapsed onto the floor, exhausted but triumphant. "It's done," she whispered, her voice shaky. "It's over." David exhaled, his body trembling with relief. He looked down at Sophie, who was still clinging to him, her face buried in his chest. "It's over," he whispered, stroking her hair. "We're safe now." The house was quiet, unnervingly so. After the battle with the spirit, the oppressive atmosphere that had plagued the Porter family for weeks seemed to have lifted. The air felt lighter, the walls less menacing. Jillian helped Ed to his feet. He was pale and shaky, but alive. "Thank you," Ed muttered, his voice weak. "To save them, for giving me a chance to make things right." Jillian nodded, her face softened with sympathy. "It's not over for you, Ed. You still have your life. But what you did tonight, that was brave." David walked over to Ed, offering his hand. "Thank you," he said quietly. "We couldn't have done this without you." Ed looked at him, his eyes filled with a mixture of regret and relief. "I should have done more sooner," he said. "I let my own fear keep me from helping others. But maybe now it's over for good." David nodded. "Maybe." As Jillian gathered her equipment and prepared to leave, she turned to David and Lisa. "The spirit is gone, but the house will always carry a trace of its energy. Be careful, and don't let fear take hold again. It's what brought the spirit here in the first place." David and Lisa nodded, feeling the weight of her words. They had won this battle, but they knew there was still healing to be done, for their family, for Sophie, and for the house itself. The days following the ritual felt surreal. The Porter house was eerily quiet, but the oppressive weight that had once filled every room was gone. The house felt like a blank slate, empty but, for the first time, free from the darkness that had loomed over them. Still, the memories lingered, and the family was left to process the emotional aftermath. Sophie, who had been at the center of it all, was slow to recover. She had stopped speaking about the man she had seen, but her eyes still held the shadows of fear. She refused to sleep in her own room, and whenever David or Lisa moved out of sight, she clung to them, anxious that something might happen while they were apart. One evening, Lisa sat on Sophie's bed, stroking her daughter's hair. "Do you want to talk about what happened, sweetie?" she asked softly. Sophie looked up at her mother with wide, solemn eyes. "Is the man gone?" she asked, her voice trembling. Lisa nodded. "Yes, baby, he's gone. Jillian and Daddy made sure of that." Sophie seemed to think about this for a moment. "But what if he comes back?" Lisa's heart broke a little at the question. "He won't," she promised, though a part of her knew that Sophie's healing would take time. "We won't let anything like that happen again." David, too, was wrestling with the emotional weight of their ordeal. Late one night, unable to sleep, he found himself sitting in the living room watching the flicker of shadows on the walls. Even though he knew the spirit was gone, his body was still on edge, as though expecting something to jump out from the darkness. Lisa joined him after a while, curling up next to him on the couch. "You're thinking about it, aren't you?" she asked quietly. David nodded, running a hand through his hair. "I keep going over it in my head. How close we came to losing her, and how I didn't listen sooner. I almost didn't believe her." Lisa put a hand on his arm, her touch gentle but firm. "You did listen, David. When it counted, you believed her. And that's what matters." David looked down at her, the guilt still gnawing at him. "But I should have trusted her from the start. I should have trusted both of you." Lisa leaned her head against his shoulder. "We were all scared. We all made mistakes, but we got through it. We're still here, and we'll keep getting stronger." David nodded, his chest tight with emotion. He had learned a hard lesson. Never again would he doubt his instincts or dismiss Sophie's fears. From now on, he would listen to his daughter, to his wife, and to himself. Word of what had happened in the Porter house spread quickly through the neighborhood. Though the details of the haunting remained private, many neighbors knew that something strange had occurred, especially after they had seen the police and investigators coming and going from the house. To David's surprise, the community, once so cold and distant, began to rally around his family. Neighbors who had barely spoken to them before stopped by with food, offered to help around the house, or simply reached out to offer support. One afternoon, Sarah Mitchell, who lived 3 doors down, knocked on their door, holding a casserole dish in her hands. "I heard you've been through a rough time," she said awkwardly, shifting on her feet. "Just wanted to bring this over. We're all thinking about you." David thanked her, still taken aback by the change in tone. After weeks of feeling like outsiders, he was surprised by the sudden warmth. As Sarah left, Lisa turned to David, raising an eyebrow. "Well, that's different." David chuckled softly. "I guess facing down an evil spirit changes people's priorities." A few weeks after the ritual, Ed Wilkins came to visit them one last time. He stood at the door, looking worn but lighter than before, as though a burden had finally been lifted from his shoulders. "I just wanted to say goodbye," Ed said, his voice rough. "I'm selling the house. I've been here too long. It's time to move on." David nodded, understanding. After everything that had happened, it made sense for Ed to leave. The house next door, like their own, had been a place of darkness and pain for too long. "Thank you," Lisa said quietly, "for helping us, for everything you did." Ed shrugged, looking uncomfortable with the praise. "I should have done more sooner, but I'm glad you're all okay." David extended his hand, and after a brief hesitation, Ed shook it. "Take care of yourself, Ed," David said. "You did the right thing in the end." As Ed walked away, David and Lisa watched him go, feeling a sense of closure. Ed's departure marked the end of one chapter and the beginning of another. They had survived, but the experience had changed them all. Over time, the Porter family began to rebuild their lives. Sophie gradually returned to her old self. though she still carried the memory of the haunting with her. Therapy helped her process her fear, and slowly she started spending more time in her own room, though the door was always left slightly ajar at night. David and Lisa, too, found their footing again. Their marriage had been tested, but the ordeal had brought them closer, reminding them of the strength they found in each other. The neighborhood, once distant and unfriendly, had shifted as well. David and Lisa began to feel like they were truly part of the community, and new friendships blossomed as they healed from trauma. One evening, as the family sat around the dinner table, laughing and enjoying their meal, the weight of the past seemed to lift entirely. The house, once filled with fear, now felt like a home again. "We did it," David said, smiling at Lisa and Sophie. "We got through it." Sophie grinned, her eyes bright. "We're stronger than the shadow man." David chuckled, ruffling her hair. "That's right, kiddo. We're stronger than anything." But even as life returned to normal, there were still small, subtle reminders of what had happened. Late at night, when the house was quiet and the world outside was still, David sometimes felt a faint chill in the air. It was nothing like the oppressive presence that had once haunted them, but it was a reminder that the house had a past, one that couldn't be erased entirely. Lisa, too, noticed small things. A door that would close on its own, the sound of footsteps in the hallway when no one was there. But they didn't scare her anymore. The spirit was gone, but the house would always carry a trace of its former darkness. One evening, as they sat together on the couch, Lisa leaned into David's side, sighing softly. "Do you think we'll ever really be free of this place?" David thought for a moment, then shook his head. "Maybe not. But we're free enough. We've made it through the worst, and now it's just a house." Lisa smiled at that, resting her head on his shoulder. "Just a house," she repeated softly. The months passed, and the Porter family continued to find their way forward. They became more involved in the community, attending neighborhood events and forming closer bonds with their neighbors. David, who had once been hesitant to trust anyone, now found himself opening up more, sharing stories with other parents, and even talking about their experience with those who asked. He was careful not to go into too much detail, but the community had been supportive in a way he never expected. Lisa joined the PTA at Sophie's school and volunteered at local events. Her calm and strength in the face of their ordeal had made her a respected figure in the neighborhood, and people looked to her for advice and support. As the neighborhood grew closer, the story of the haunted house became something of a legend, whispered about, but never fully discussed in the open. It was part of their history now, but it no longer held power over them. A year after the events with the spirit, the house next door, Ed's former home, was sold. David and Lisa watched from their porch as the new family moved in, a young couple with a baby in tow. "They have no idea what they're in for," David joked, though there was no malice in his voice. He had come to terms with what had happened, and he didn't believe the house was dangerous anymore. Lisa smiled. Maybe it's time for a fresh start for them, too, like it was for us. David nodded, his gaze lingering on the young couple as they unpacked. "I hope they find their way." As life settled into a new normal, David and Lisa remained vigilant, always mindful of Sophie's well-being. They had learned to trust their instincts, to listen carefully when something didn't feel right. One evening, as Sophie played in the backyard, Lisa sat beside David on the porch, watching her with a peaceful smile. "Do you think we'll ever have to face something like that again?" Lisa asked quietly. David shook his head. "I don't know, but I do know that if we ever do, we'll be ready, and we'll always listen to Sophie. No more second-guessing." Lisa smiled, leaning her head against his shoulder. "Good, because I don't think I could go through that again." David chuckled softly. Neither could I. The lingering traces of the haunting slowly faded, replaced by a sense of peace that permeated every part of their lives. Sophie continued to grow, her fear of the shadowy figure diminishing with each passing day. She still had moments of hesitation, but the love and support of her parents helped her heal. David and Lisa, too, found peace in their home. It wasn't the perfect life they had envisioned when they first moved in, but it was theirs, and they had fought hard for it. On quiet nights, when the wind rustled through the trees and the stars twinkled overhead, David sometimes thought about the spirit, about Ed, and about everything they had been through. But the fear was gone, replaced by a sense of quiet resilience. They had faced darkness, and they had won. As the Porter family sat together on the front porch, watching the sunset over Evergreen Street, they felt a sense of calm they hadn't known in a long time. The house that had once been a place of fear had become a place of love, healing, and growth. Sophie played in the yard, laughing and chasing fireflies, her giggles filling the air. Lisa looked over at David, her eyes bright with happiness. "We made it." David smiled, wrapping his arm around her. "Yeah," he said softly, "we made it." And as the sun dipped below the horizon, casting a warm golden glow over their home, they knew that no matter what challenges lay ahead, they would face them together as a family. Months later, as the Porters continued to build their life in Brookfield, they remained a symbol of strength and resilience in their community. The haunting had changed them, but it hadn't broken them. In the years to come, they would look back on their time in the house as a reminder that fear could be faced, that darkness could be conquered, and that family was the strongest force of all. As they moved forward, they carried the lessons of their ordeal with them, always trusting each other, always standing together, and always moving toward the light. As the Porter family sat together, watching Sophie play in the yard, the fear and darkness of the past seemed like a distant memory. They had faced the unthinkable and emerged stronger for it. Their house was no longer a place of shadows, but a symbol of resilience, love, and healing. The journey had been long and filled with challenges, but now the future looks bright. And as the last rays of the sun dipped below the horizon, they knew they would face whatever came next, together. Thank you for joining us on this incredible journey of the Porter family. If you enjoyed this story of courage, resilience, and the power of family, don't forget to subscribe to our channel for more gripping and emotional stories that will keep you on the edge of your seat. Hit the like button, leave a comment, and share your thoughts with us. We love hearing from you. And if you're looking for another thrilling tale, click here to watch the next heart-pounding story we've handpicked just for you.